talks here over the years, all interesting, and it's a pleasure to be able to contribute and tell you here tonight of some of the results of our work that we've done over the years, particularly in Lough Corrib. I work in the National Mining Service of the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. And within that unit, within the National Mining Service, we have a unit focused on maritime archaeology and underwater archaeology. And we were set up in the late 90s, and we've been a small unit. We still are a small unit, probably under-resourced over the years, but our resources are increasing, and we're getting new staff at present, so things are looking very bright for the future. But we have been involved in doing some really interesting projects over the years, and I'm going to tell you about one of those projects, which is mainly focused on Lough Corrib, which we've been working on since 2011. But just as way of introduction, just to say what we do, we are responsible for managing and protecting underwater heritage in Ireland, and it's a huge brief. But our main role is really to identify and map the shipwrecks in Irish waters, particularly wrecks that we want to protect. So in that regard, we have a database of over 18,000 shipwrecks, of which we've about 18,000 documented losses. And we have locations for about 4,000 of those. But every year, more and more wrecks are coming to light through the work of ourselves and other bodies who I'll mention later. But we also assess planning applications in the marine environment. So the dredging in the port here, all the offshore wind farms, all the cables that are coming ashore, pass our desk for review and comment, and we try and put forward the right archaeological mitigation and strategy in place to ensure that some of the shipwrecks that we've identified and other wrecks that are yet to be identified are protected and avoided. So we also go out and do our own survey work ourselves, and I'm going to talk about that in Lough Corrib, and mainly in relation to trying to identify sites and then protect sites as well. So that's our map of known wreck sites that we have in Irish waters. We know there's a lot more to be added to that, and we know that there's some inaccuracies in that need to be rectified. But for a small unit, there's 5 of us. We have a huge brief to try and manage and protect these wrecks from whether it be salvers, offshore development, and other activities which might accidentally impact these wrecks, such as climate change, storms, which I'll show you some images of, wrecks that have been affected by that. So again, we're a small unit, so we can't do it on our own, so we have to rely on cooperation and collaboration with other users of the sea. People like Cormac, who we are constantly in contact with in relation to getting information on wrecks and histories of wrecks and new discoveries and discoveries from the past. But we also liaise with some of the divers who are doing some of the deeper divers, like Barry McGill here, who's shown this fantastic photograph here of the SS Roscommon, which is located off Donegal in, I don't know, maybe it's at 80 metres of water, but it's deep enough. Here, torpedoed in 1917. And then we'd have a big role in collaborating with the Irish National Seabed Survey, or the Infomar project run by the GSI and the Marine Institute, who are out mapping the seabed on a daily basis and have come up with hundreds and hundreds of new wrecks. We also do our own surveys here, and are called in to try and investigate and maybe protect, record, and sometimes retrieve objects from wrecks which are under threat. And here's just 2 examples of a cannon from a Spanish Armada vessel that sank off the Sligo coast in 1588. We retrieved this cannon in 2015. And if I have time, which I probably won't, but I do have a few slides on that, which I can show at the end if anyone's interested. And here's another example of a wreck here located off Donegal, which we thought was Armada, but turns out to be a 17th century vessel. So every year we know there's an annual cycle of storms and bad weather, and this results in huge movements of sand around our coast. Sand gets blown in and then stripped out on a seasonal basis. And we know with climate change and increased storminess and increased numbers of storms that we're certainly getting more reports like this of wrecks that are being uncovered on the beaches around the coast. And if you look at a beach like North Hull, not too far away from us, there could be 10 or 15 wrecks that uncover from time to time, depending on different weather. And again, the same on, there's one example there of a wreck which uncovered in 2004. And that uncovers every now and again, maybe every 2 or 3 years, but depends on the weather and the storms. And again, same in Portmarnock Beach. You can walk the beach one day and there's nothing there at low tide. And then a couple of months later, there's a wreck here and there's a wreck there. And then those wrecks cover over, and then 2 or 3 other wrecks and cover. So if you are walking the beaches, the coast, keep an eye out for these sites because they are there to be discovered. And whilst many of us think that most of the wrecks have been discovered and are easy to spot, there are some new wrecks to be found quite easily sometimes, and surprising that they're so close to us, and you kind of think they should be known about it. But another indication of wrecks maybe being disturbed by climate or storms is that we get these ship timbers washing ashore on basically mostly during the winter. And we have to go out and retrieve these, liaise with the National Museum of Ireland and try and protect them. But they are a good indicator that maybe there's a wreck, just maybe in the shallow waters, in the surf zone that's being battered by the storms and covering. It's a protective layer of sand, strips out, and the vessel begins to break up, and then it might cover up again during the summer. So, but I just thought I'd show you an example of this image here, and I hope you can kind of see it. It's located just about 2 kilometres out here within the port environs, and just on the north bank. And I was looking at an area, a recent aerial photograph of the harbour, which shows the harbour at low water. And you can see here just a shipwreck here, just sitting on the north bank. That, as far as I know, nobody has located before, and certainly never been reported to us or the port. And there's probably another one here, and I think there's another one here. You see that straight line that curves around a bit, and there's possibly one there. And we know from the records that there's probably 300 or 400 shipwrecks that were documented as being lost on the approaches into Dublin port, and they have to be somewhere. Some got washed away, some got salvaged, some got broken up in storms. But these are ones here that are still yet to be maybe identified, located, and there's probably more out there in an environment that we think is kind of devoid of sites. So lots of sites to be found and investigated, documented, identified, and that's part of our role kind of going forward. But I say small unit, so we can't deal with every one of the 18,000 shipwrecks or so. But I'm here to talk about logboats and mainly, and our work on Lough Corrib. And I suppose logboats are the earliest form of watercraft that we have in the archaeological record. One of the earliest sites dates back to about 8,000 BC in Holland here. And we have a couple around that date, which would be early Mesolithic, would be these early hunter-gatherers, early Middle Stone Age people who wandered around Ireland hunting, and but obviously had boats so they could use the waterways. But so there's about, I think, just up to 4,000 logboats recorded in this database here. There's probably more, and you can see that they're kind of concentrated along the main rivers, arteries, and the main areas where there's lakes within Europe. Huge number in Holland and northern Germany, and a good number in Britain, and then we've a huge number again, and one of the highest numbers in Europe, in Ireland. And this is a distribution of the logboat sites we have from Ireland, which I've been able to document. And we have about 600 for the whole island. And again, and it's kind of obvious that they are located in the areas where there's waterways. Mostly in the northern half of the country, where we've lots of lakes and rivers and big waterways, concentrations. Up to Shannon, places like Loch Allen, some of the lakes in Roscommon, a good number in around the River Bann and Loch Ney, and so on. And what I'm going to talk about tonight is a group of logboats here from Lough Corrib, which Cormac rightly pointed out that were discovered by this hydrographer who mapped the lake, which I'll talk about in a minute. So those who don't know what's a logboat, I'm sure you all know, but some people think that it might be a group of logs kind of roped together to form a kind of a log raft. But what I'm talking about here is one of these vessels that's been carved from a single log or the trunk of a tree and hollowed out in the middle and then kind of shaped to form a boat-shaped vessel. And most of them are quite simple in their construction, but some are a bit more complex, and I'll show you that hopefully today. So we've lots of logboats in Ireland because we had lots of large oak trees. To build a logboat of any size, you need a tree of a certain size, and Ireland, as you know, was covered in forests, from the earliest times up until, I suppose, 1,000 years ago maybe, and even less so during the 16th, 17th and 18th century, when a lot of the wood forests were stripped for constructing ships to the British Navy and for funding, for building various parts of Britain. we can see here, so if you want a logboat that's maybe 10 metres long, you need a tree that might need to be 20 or 25 metres high, and they don't really exist so much anymore. You don't really get to that size because they don't get the opportunity to grow that high. You also need it of a certain width, because you can't have a logboat that's maybe 20 centimetres wide. You need a good wide base on it here. But you can see that once they have to get their tree selection right, and we're kind of assumed that back, let's say in Stone Age times, that they did manage forests to a certain degree. So they get these oak trees that are growing relatively close together, but enough space to grow tall. Say they're close together so they can grow tall quickly. They fight to get sunlight, so they grow very quickly, and the lower ends don't get an opportunity to grow branches, or else they're probably trimmed at a time, because branches equals knots in wood, and they can be weak points. So once you have your tree selected, you chop it down, and you imagine that, let's say the Stone Age logboats, they're doing this with stone axes. So very difficult, very time consuming, and a huge job to cut down a big oak tree, chop it either end, and then you start stripping the bark and the sapwood from it. This is just showing you here quickly. Oak's quite good in that you can take it out in blocks, but you have to hollow it out basically until you get your desired boat shape. In this case, they've not shown a stern to the vessel, so they would insert it kind of a transom board in that, and we get that in Ireland and Britain from the late Bronze Age onwards, where it's possible that a lot of these trees were suffering from disease, so they got heart rot in the middle, and they had to plug this hole here, whereas the upper end would be in better health. So, believe it or not, there's actually a lot of people building logboats around Europe, and there's several logboat regattas where people build them and race them, and so on. So some do it for tourist attractions like this here. This is Lough Corrib in Scotland. There's a replica Crannoe, which is built on piles. Sadly, this burnt down a few years ago, but here they are showing a logboat here. Maybe it's around 8 metres long or so. And you can see that these boats, they can hold a person maybe every metre, so we can kind of gauge that how many people can be carried on a logboat. These are young kids, so they're a bit smaller, but if you're carrying adults, we reckon it's about one person every metre. So if you have a 10 metre logboat, you potentially could carry 10 people, or you could have 10 paddlers, and so on. And we know from analysing the historical record, archaeological records, and from our own work, that they were used for a variety of functions, whether it be fishing and hunting, travel and transport, and obviously just for moving around for social engagements and so on. Now, just to move on to our work on Lough Corrib, this doesn't show up very well on this screen, but there's a lake here called Lough Corrib, and it's just north of Galway City for anybody who doesn't know it. It's the largest lake in the Republic, and I think it's 177 square kilometres, so it's quite a large body of water. Only Lough Neagh is bigger than this lake in the island. And you can see here, but we were operating basically in the middle here. Hopefully it will show, it won't show on that map, but most of the sites I'm going to show you are located in this area here, where the lake gets very narrow. It's like 17 kilometres wide here. It's only 650 metres wide in the middle, and it's a very narrow channel, so an important location strategically, politically and historically in the whole region. The lake was important in that it formed the baronies that now are extant today, with Connemara and over to the west side, and the plains of Galway over the east side. And that's reflected in the early tribal boundaries, but also when the Anglo-Normans came in, how they divided up this whole region, which was controlled largely by Galway. And those baronies and parishes still are extant today. But we know that Lough Corrib and the River Corrib was an important waterway from early times, because it appears to be mentioned on this on Ptolemy's kind of 2nd century AD map or description of Ireland. Now this is a 15th century version of it. The original doesn't survive, but all the detail survives. I can see here, this is what we think is the River Corrib and that waterway, which is called the Isolda here. And then they mention a tribe here as well called the Otini. So we also think that this information that Ptolemy was writing down stemmed from many centuries of gathering of information from mariners who were sailing up from the Mediterranean, maybe bringing gold from Ireland down to the Mediterranean and bringing up other goods and so on. So this tribe here could be, tribes relating to, the centuries before Christ, or possibly even into the late Bronze Age. There's probably a tradition here. And it's interesting that some of the boats we're finding are associated with this Iron Age tribe, a time for when we've no written sources. So it's a nice little kind of matching of the historical data into archaeological finds. This is the 17th century view of Lough Corrib. It's well documented from about this time onwards. But the name Lough Corrib, we think, is derived from the name Erbson, and it was originally called Lough Erbson, let's say around the 11th, 12th century. And we think that Erbson is a derivative of Monoman MacLear. Don't ask me how, you'd have to ask the linguists. But Monoman is a mythical figure, kind of, and you see lots of boats around the country called MacLear or Lear, and MacLear means basically the water god, and the legend goes that when there was a big battle here in Moycullen, and when Monoman was killed at this battle, and when they went to dig his grave, a big torrent of water poured out and formed this lake. So Monoman is associated with the lake and the traditions around the lake. He's also associated with of having a boat which carried the sun when it sank into the sea at night, carried the sun through the underworld and back out again and over to the side, and then the sun popped up. So he's kind of traditionally associated with that. And it's kind of a tradition that's spread across Europe, not necessarily with Monoman, but there would have been other probably deities or gods who would have done that. But Monoman is the Irish deity who did that, and he's also associated with the Isle of Man. So Lough Corrib, if you don't know, it's a beautiful place, lots of nice islands and views, castles, ecclesiastical sites, a very important angling location for salmon and trout, and of, I suppose, world renowned. But whilst it is one of these very fine, beautiful places, it does have its dangers, and large parts of the lakes are very rocky, and lurking below a lot of the water, are rocks like this, which can make it very dangerous to navigate unless you have a good chart of it. And this chap here, who Cormac mentioned, Trevor Nortich, who currently is based in South America, but he manages a fleet of tankers and large ships, but lives in Ireland has lived in Ireland from time to time. But he was out one day on his angling on a small boat here, and bumped his prop off a rock and got into trouble. So he was kind of frustrated that the only chart of the lake dates back to the 1840s and 50s. Here, one of these British Admiralty charts, which is a fine piece of work and a lovely map, but it doesn't really map very well all these little rocks here, and there's lots of uncharted rocks on it. So he decided to go out and map the lake himself, and he produced a very fine chart of the lake, which you can download on your iPhone now if you want, or else he's also produced this book here, which a chart book, which if you are kind of out on the lake, I'd definitely go and purchase this, because it's essential for safe navigation. But I suppose one of the methods he used to map the lake was one of these fish finders, which you'll maybe all be familiar with. These kind of recreational devices. They're almost like a sat nav now. It's a little unit like this. You stick in your boat and you can kind of scan the seabed like this, and it gives you. It's good for finding fish and for establishing the nature of the lake bed or the seabed if you're using the sea, and you might find out where fish might kind of hide out, but you can also see the fish and shoals of fish as well. But one of the byproducts of his surveys was that he started to find these wrecks here, and this is the first image he sent us here. We can see this kind of narrow double-ended boat here, and we can kind of see the ribs sticking up and the stern and the bow post sticking up. So we were actually just not too far away, and we decided to dive the site, thinking, kind of hoping that maybe it's a Viking wreck, because it had that kind of profile that it could be one of these double-ended Viking wrecks, but it did seem too good to be true, because it was standing so crowded at the lake bed. But you never know until you go out and dive them. It's off in Ishambo Island, just near Lough here, and this is the vessel. And unfortunately, I have no photographs to show you of the vessel because it was so murky and dark and fun. But it turned out to be kind of maybe a late 19th century, early century kind of sailing vessel, finally built. vessel, possibly associated with this house here, which is a 19th century vessel here, and we can see parts of the rigging were still on it, and there's a pulley block and on. So it's a site we do have to go back to and look at some stage, once we have the time, but it wasn't a priority at the time. But it is part of the, I suppose, the history of use of vessels on the lake. The same way you would have seen similar vessels maybe, in this area 100 years ago or so. So over time, Trevor started to find a lot more vessels and a lot more images of logboats and so on. So we set up a project then to go, as part of our annual kind of dive project every year, to go and dive the vessels. And as part of justification, we felt that because early on we're getting good results, that these sites are under threat. And there are a number of threats to them, as in, you get these invasive species, and you might be able to see here, these little white dots on it here, these are zebra mussels, and they cling to these boats. They cling to any hard surface in the lake, and they spread like wildfire. And whilst they may be good for cleaning the water, but their tentacles eat into the wood, and then when they die off, they fall off, and then they can kind of slowly delaminate the wood, and over time they would damage the vessel. There's lots of this South African curleweed, which is clogging up a lot of the lakes and removing a lot of the oxygen. And again, that's another invasive species, and there is a program of weed clearance going on in Lough Corrib, and the weed growing itself, because it grows like forests, can damage the vessels, and then the weed clearance can also damage it. So, and then there's obvious kind of impacts, whether it be sometimes accidental anchoring. Sometimes people go in and dive and interfere with the wrecks, not necessarily always on purpose to damage them, but that sometimes happens as well. And then obviously we're seeing increased storm damage, we see increased movement of sediments on the lake bed, which you don't really expect in a lake environment, but because it's so big, it's almost like a mini sea, so the sediments do move up and down, like sand waves like you get on the seabed. So, I said when we set up, we have an annual kind of program of diving on the lake. We might spend 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes 4 weeks on the lake every year, and of the surveys that Trevor did, he probably found about 100 anomalies on the lake bed, and there's probably about 50 of them that have turned out to be maybe logboats or wrecks. So we have about 7 or 8 left that we need to investigate. We've got through about kind of 40 of them or so, and we hope to do that this year and maybe next year. We go out, we dive, we photograph, we might come down and take a sample to date it, and we draw and we measure and record, and then generally cover over and try and preserve it in situ, because we can't lift 50 logboats. There's nowhere to put them, there's no resources to conserve them, and there's nowhere to put them on display. So we can leave them on the lake bed in a secure environment, and if we can, we hope to formulate a kind of a longer term management plan for how we might protect them in situ. And then also sometimes we find kind of important artefacts on the boats, and we lift these, and they go to the museum that are conserved. It can be tricky diving. As soon as you hit the bottom, it clouds up. It's like throwing a bag of flour in the air, and it might take 2 minutes to clear, or it might take 10-15 minutes. So it can be zero viz, and this diver is just kind of moving on quickly to try and escape the dust the diver is kicking up, and we don't have the option of, let's say, hovering over it, because we need to sometimes go down and to investigate what we're dealing with. So it can be zero viz, or and you can come out dirtier than you go in sometimes, but that's the nature of it. I'll skip that there. But so this is a scan here. Now you won't see much on it, but one of these recreational side-scan sonars, or fish finders, where it scans the seabed. This here is the water column, which from here to here, that's the basic sonar on the boat, and if you go down here, it's about 6 meters, and you can see a big mound of rocks here to the right. But then, to gauge the scale, this is probably about 8 meters long. There's a logboat here, you can just see the outline of it there, and then you can actually see the diver here with its 2 fins sticking up, and this is the bubbles coming up from the diver there. So we can kind of get that accuracy of it, which is quite good for a device that might cost €1,000, and maybe 20 years ago would have cost you 50,000 or 100,000. So technology is moving on and helping a lot. So here's a better map of the logboats here, and you can see there's a big concentration here in this narrow area, and mainly because we think this is one of the important crossing points on the lake between the 2 tribal boundaries here. So any traffic going up and down the lake would have to come through here, so it's an important strategic point. And then naturally, where you have ship movements, eventually some of these vessels will sink. We think there's probably 8,000 years of activity on the lake. You know, if one sinks every 100 years, and they probably sank more than that, more often than that. You know, you have 800. You should have 800 vessels in the lake. You know, so we found, well, 15's been found. So there's probably a load more to be found, but we won't go searching because we've enough on our plate. So yeah, this is close up here, and you can see this is a place called Knott Ferry, and that gives a hint that there's probably a ferry for a long time, ferrying point for a long time. This is go big, and surprisingly, these red dots here show all the archaeological sites, and there's actually more sites in the lake than there is on land that we know of, which is kind of surprising. You would think there'd be a huge concentration of lakes, of sites on the land, but they're not there for some reason. Maybe yet to be found. But so most of the sites I'm going to talk about are concentrated here. So one of the first boats we investigated was up at Annakeen, which is just anyway, it's just up there. And if you're looking down on the plan of a boat, this is about 12.5 meters long. So we've uncovered the boat, and here's a plan of it here. 12.5 meters long, about 1 meter wide, and it has a design on the bottom of it, on the internal floor, this long ridge here and these cross ridges here, and a bit of a raised stern here. Now, the upper side of the boat don't survive. You might be able to see it here. You can see this cross ridge here. This is just some of the divers in action here. That's an idea here, and of what it looks like. A shallow ridge which doesn't really have any proper function, because it doesn't really provide any structural strength to the boat. Because when oak splits, it splits longitudinally, you know, and you're only talking about a couple of centimeters, so it's not, you know, and the floor is probably 16 centimeters thick anyway, so it's not a huge difference. So it puzzles at what this ridge is for. Is it mimicking maybe kind of a plank vessel, which has a keel and maybe, you know, kind of frames or ribs, whatever you want to call them there, maybe. Does it have symbolic use? We were talking about this vessel dates to 2400 BC, so yeah, 4,500 years ago. So who knows what people were thinking back then and why they wanted to boat a certain way. But when we saw this boat, we knew exactly what the data was, because there's one of these on display in Kildare Street in Dublin. That's an idea here. Patch of burning here, and let's just see will this work. This is a video here. It's slightly sped up, but a little bit of dust there in the water, but it will come a bit clear now. But so the ridge is there, patch of burning. There was a fire on board for whatever reason. These cross ridges here, and that's it. Now, for any of you who've been to the museum in Kildare Street, and I advise you all to go. There's a 15.5 metre long one, even longer than the one we found, of the exact same, better preserved, the exact same design. It has, you can just see the ridge there, go down, and it's only, on both boats, they only go like 2/3 of the way up the boat, so they don't go to full length for some reason here. This one here, found in 1902, in Galway as well, about 20 or 30 kilometres north of the Lough Corrib one. Here, that's it when it was found, and this was found in the bog, but the bog is on a river that leads down to Lough Corrib. So it's possible that, well, we kind of think that because it's in the bog, it was probably a bog when it was buried, but it must have been that maybe this was a ritual deposition, that this boat was built for a special reason and they deposited in the bog as an offering to one of the deities, you know. Because some people argue it's a bit too heavy and too thick and maybe wouldn't have floated very well, so maybe it was never built intended to be used. But we have one in the lake, and then there's another one found about 10 kilometres north of that again. And so that's the one in Kildare Street. You can see the ridges there. This is our one here, and then there's another one. It's only a fragment of it here, and that's found just in South Mayo. Just, you know, so they're all within about 30 kilometres of each other, and they're all. The dates aren't coming up there. Sorry, yeah. Some of the dates aren't coming. they all date to the exact same period. When radio commented, there was a 10-year difference in the 3 boats. Now, you have to calibrate it, but you're basically talking around the same time, all within 20-30 kilometres, and they all have this design. So there's somebody in North Galway sent Mayo saying, you need to build your logboat this way. It has special meaning for us. Whatever it is, whether it's a symbolic one, maybe it's dividing space for different classes of people or something like that. A vessel like this, it's what function did it have? It's not a boat you would use for everyday kind of running down to the shops and get a pint of milk. It's a special vessel that would need to be manned by a large crew of people. So we think that it's probably a status vessel. So you have maybe a chieftain or a local chieftain who is has his crew of warriors or something like this, and we see these designs on rock art in Scandinavia where we have the big chief with his big axe there and his group of warriors kind of paddling him along. This is actually from Wood Martin, above in Irish lakes in the Cranlow back in the ground. He has drawn, so back to 19th century, but a vessel, maybe what it might look like. Maybe not as crowded, it seems a bit overcrowded there, so we could be talking like a war canoe, maybe, or a vessel that was used for certain ceremonies or rituals out in the lake, and so on. Now, just to move on, let's say 1500 years or so, you can't really see it on this image here, but there's a sonar image here. You can see the outline of this boat, and this is what we see. Sometimes, we only see the edge of the boat, the upper rim, on the sonar, and we saw the sign here, and we said, God, that looks like a bit of rope. And if it was, let's say, a scan of the harbour there, or let's say another harbour where there's moorings, you'd say it looks like a mooring rope that we'd often see. So when we dived it, we found a rope, and the reason why it came up so well in the sonar was because it was covered in zebra mussels. So then at the end of it, there was 2 milk cartons, which were originally would have been used as a float. So the rope was a guide down to the logboat. So we dived it, let's say in the last 15 years or something, whenever, I'm not sure when milk cartons like that came in, but and it sank. So this is what we see on the seabed, on the lake bed, just the upper rim and the zebra mussels, and it hadn't been disturbed in a while, so it was probably many, probably 10 or 15 years ago since somebody had dived it. They attached a rope to it, and the cartons sank for whatever reason, and they left it be. This is just a very rough outline of what the boat looked like. It's a 10-metre long logboat, originally a bit longer, and it's kind of devoid of any features in the middle. No design like the other ones we saw, no ridges or anything like that. So actually, the first time we dived, we said, look, this has been dived before. We'll move on to other ones which maybe haven't been dived to see if there's anything on, because we expected it to be maybe cleared out and so on. But when we came back to take a look at it on the last day, we, to our surprise, came across this bronze spearhead. It's about 30 centimetres long. Quite a beautiful object here, kind of a leaf shaped with a ridge going along it here, and with still some of the wooden haft left inside it, which was made of ash. So it would have been an ash haft or spear handle, and with this bronze spearhead. So we knew it probably dated to late Bronze Age sometime. We got a date for the boat that was around 1000 BC, 1000 to 900 BC. So we're talking late Bronze Age here. We found this boat, but we also found a wooden spear made from yew wood, and it has a pointed rectangular point, finely carved rectangular point. Again, a very rare object, and that was found outside the boat. So we're kind of wondering, with the divers who dived, we're wondering why they didn't find these objects, or if they did find them, where they just they find a pile of gold as well, and said we're not keeping the bronze and the wooden stuff, So, obviously sometimes these objects are just easily missed. But the wooden spear was outside, so maybe it was cast out, or maybe just people decided to leave it there. But an important find, and we don't very often find logboats with artefacts in them. And that's one thing Lough Corrib is really good at, it's finding logboats with artefacts in them. Because many of the logboats found, of those 600 or so, maybe half of them were found in the 19th century or the early 20th century. In rivers, they were hauled out, not done archaeologically. Whatever contents were aboard were lost, So this is a really good opportunity to look at these boats and ascertain what they're used for, So again, that boat is just located here, and I think, well, a 10-metre long boat, featureless, empty floor space, possibly used as a ferry across the point there. You know, we obviously lots of space to carry people, carry goods, something like this here. You know, alternatively, whoops. Let's just move there now. Yeah. There we go. Of a similar date, we have this model of a logboat here, which is from near Hull, the River Humber, you know, Roos Car, and dates to a similar date. And we have this model, probably of a logboat with maybe an animal head, and you do get logboats with these animal heads. And it seems to be carrying 4 warriors there, but maybe originally 5, and they have shields. We don't have any weapons, but they have a hole in their hand to hold maybe a weapon like a spear. They also have a hole here, somewhere in the middle here, to display their manlyhood, but they don't seem to survive for some reason. But it obviously shows probably the prestige that these warrior casts were probably held in, that they were big, tall, strong men who displayed their wares and their weapons and their strength and manhood. But I'm not saying that people were like that in Lough Corrib, going around kind of showing off their, but it's possible that, you know, a lot of these boats were used as kind of war canoes and were a bit like today, vessels of power, where you could exert political control, you could raid, you could attack, move around the lake very quickly, go in, you know, maybe kind of cattle raid, which was a big thing in Ireland, you know, from the Iron Age onwards, certainly, and maybe the Bronze Age, but something like that. A lot of the boats, and I won't go through all the boats, and we've some exciting stories about other boats, but we get lots of stone on them, and we're not sure why. Sometimes it's a single stone like that, other times it's other smaller stones, and then sometimes it's definitely a cargo of some sort, you know. We have a theory that some of these may have been sank on purpose, and the stone was used to help keep them on the bottom. We have 3 boats, all within about 600 metres of each other, well, within 200 metres of each other, spread out over 600 metres, all at the same depth, all similar distance from the shore, all at the same date, all kind of laden with stones. And it seems unlikely that they all accidentally sank at the same time, at the same date, carrying stones. So we're surmising that sometimes, and we see it elsewhere in Europe, that when a vessel reaches the end of its useful life, they dispose of it as part of a ritual activity to venerate the gods or something like that. And we see it in the bogs in Europe. I'll show you some boats later, the Horchring boat or an island boat. We see it, let's say in Egypt, in the temple, there's boats buried in alongside the pyramids. And then other times we see it where people break up a bit of a boat and incorporate it into structures that where other artefacts might be deposited, you know. And we do get lots of ritual deposition of artefacts on land. So you go down, a lot of the really fine artefacts from on Spain Museum, like the gold on Spain has been deposited on a bog, in a bog or in a wet area, as part of ritual deposition. And it's possible that maybe we're dealing with something like that with these boats here. So this is a 10-metre long logboat. I haven't calculated the stone, but it is contained within this area here, and we wonder, is it part of ritual deposition? And I do have more evidence for that, but I don't have time to show it here. But I have a little video of it anyway. But no, that's not showing there. No, I have a video there, but it's not going to show on this. But I can show anybody afterwards if they want. Yeah. So, moving on a couple of hundred years, and I do think that this is a ritual deposition on the lake bed, for certain. This is, again, in this ferrying point, it's called the Lees Island 5 logboat. Doesn't show up well here, but it's a 7.5-metre long logboat. Quite simple, quite a chunky logboat. The walls are quite thick, and the base of the floor is quite thick. But it is a bit more refined than the earlier logboats, and it's a lot more boxy and rectangular in profile, in cross profile and longitudinal profile. And it's 2 seats, you can see here, two poles that are inserted through the side walls. Don't look particularly comfortable, but maybe it's back brace if you're sitting down, you could maybe lean back against it. Not certain. But within the boat, we also found under the stern seat there is a hafted iron axe here, which has been incorporated into the boat, which I'll explain in a minute. There's this 2 metre long steering oar, which I'm arguing, and then there's an iron spear under this seat. So there seems to be, two objects under each seat, purposely laid there. You can kind of see the steering oar here. Here it's quite long, 2 metres long. The axe is under this seat. Better idea here. 2 seats finely carved. This is the iron spearhead with part of the haft. Unfortunately, didn't survive intact, full haft. This is the paddle here, finely carved. Doesn't look used. This diamond-shaped blade, and its proportions are interesting in that. There's also a split there, which is interesting, and then there's 2 thickness gauge holes here. So when they're carving out the tree, so that they don't over hollow the boat, sometimes they drill a hole from underneath, and when they're hollowing down and reach the hole, they know they've reached the desired depth, and then they plug it with a dowel. And one of the dowels was still in place, and the other one was empty. But this. So again, we have a vessel here with a big empty, well, not a big, an empty space in the middle, maybe some carrying cargo or people, and two people paddling the boat, or maybe 3, one stern. Again, these are the artefacts close up, and all the tool marks really well preserved. So we know it was probably freshly carved when it was put in the boat. I suppose the interesting thing that we felt was that a 2 metre long oar or paddle is too big for a logboat. If you think about it, like it's taller than me, so if you're, even if you're standing up, it would be too heavy, and the steering oar handle would be too large. And it kind of reminded me just a bit of the proportions of the stern rudder on the Broighter boat, which is on display in the museum in Kildare Street, and one of the most beautiful objects in there. I think that it has that same proportions, and it's possible that this stern oar is part of a cargo and not meant for a logboat, whereas most of the logboat paddles are 1.5 metres or smaller and lighter in construction, because the paddler needs to hold it, whereas a 2 metre long steering oar, if you're standing, it just doesn't work. But I suppose one of the most interesting objects on board is this hafted iron axe. Very unique in Ireland, and probably in much of Europe, to get the haft surviving. It's a 2-piece haft. Here's the handle with this little grip at the end, which is almost like you can get a grip on a hurley. That doesn't seem to have changed much since the early Iron Age. Go to a head, and then they insert this piece here to where the iron axe is. And this is a wrought iron axe. It's hammered around to make it rather than cast. They were casting in the Bronze Age. They hadn't learned how to cast iron at this stage, around 300 BC. So they used to kind of hammer the iron to get the same shape. A little loop here to tie a little cord onto the handle there to keep it down. But interestingly, this axe has been kind of what I would call incorporated into the boat. It's become part of the boat by, they carved a little recess in the side wall here where this head is, so that head could kind of sit into it. They carved a little circular recess on the handle, and they dropped the seat down to clamp the axe in place. So, and then when they did that, they left a gap up here. You can just kind of see it, just about. We don't have photographs of it, but so here's the axe when we took it out. There's the semicircular notch where the seat clamps it in place. So they weren't keeping it secure. They weren't. It wasn't there for further use, because they kind of destroyed the integrity of the handle. A couple of chops of that and everything would break. And they actually, once we released the seat, it actually just fell apart. It had already kind of broken. But so you suppose you have to ask the question: why would you make an axe part of a boat? Why would you incorporate it into the boat? And it has to be something kind of more symbolic, really, and meaning that way. And I suppose we kind of think that, I suppose, that boat had reached the end of its useful life. I pointed out there was a 4 metre long crack, and they maybe decided, let's sink the boat and deposit on the seabed as a votive offering, or a ceremonial offering to a god or a deity. And why would you include a really important object like this? These axes are only really been introduced to Ireland at a time. This is really kind of high technology, an expensive object that you wouldn't carelessly give away or deposit on the lake bed. So it has to be a very meaningful kind of deposit of this vessel on the lake bed. Also, you see they have one object at one seat, another object, two objects, another seat. And I suppose our working theory is that maybe this was the chief carpenter's axe, and he used this tree to chop down, and he used this axe to chop down the very tree that hollowed out this logboat. And maybe this person died, passed away, and they might have buried his most recent belongings, most recent work, this steering oar. Maybe that was his spear, maybe this is his axe, maybe that was his boat, and it's deposited on the lake bed. It's possible they buried him in the logboat on the lake bed, but his remains wouldn't survive, they would decompose fairly quickly. So we do see stuff like this going on throughout Europe, like the Horchspring Boat, 300 BC. This is it here in Copenhagen on display, the water remains of it. And in that, there was actually 172 spears buried. So we think that is a war booty. So maybe there was a battle on this island in Denmark, and the victors deposited the booty that they took off the losers of the battle, all their weapons. Some of them were bent over, so they couldn't be longer. In the boat, as an offering and thanks to a war god who helped them win that battle. We see it, again in the pyramids here. This is a lot earlier, about 2400 BC. We see it in Ireland, but we have a deposit of a boat here, the Broighter boat, along with a hoard of other golden objects up off Derry of Lough Corrib. And there is also a connection to Monument MacLear, who's connected with this lake there. There's other boats, one site today at 300 BC. So it's a widespread tradition. There's lots of examples. We haven't really looked at it yet, but I think we're getting more and more evidence of it here in Ireland. So I'll just show you. Most of these boats are quite shallow. So you can see that's just from the surface right down. It's about 6 metres. This is a particularly good day for visibility. You can see one of our divers here, Rex Bangater, who works with Tom there, and he is recording the boat, basically measuring every square inch of it. And a process like this took probably 2 days on the water. Rex spent the plus 2 days getting every measurement, drawing it onto a board. Now we can use different techniques to get those measurements. We can use something called photogrammetry, where you take a whole series of overlapping photographs, you stick them in the computer, and they give you the same results. But this is the boat here. You can see the axe, which is slightly dislodged there, but this wooden pole seat, and it's not the best video, but nice flat bottom floor, and this long steering oar, which is way too big for a logboat and for this vessel, and the spearhead there over the other seat. So that's, once we've kind of cleaned out the vessels and recorded them, that's what we're left with. And then we cover them over, but we did retrieve those objects for safekeeping. There was a kind of replica made of it, It's not an exact replica, but it's about 5.5 metres long, whereas our boat was 7.5 metres long. So the slightly would have made it to about here. But it was great to see a logboat floating on the lake again. And this is now sitting outside the courthouse in Lough. If you do want to go along and see it, see what you might be likely to see it. But we're all relieved that it did actually float, So, I suppose one of the finest vessels we have is this 10th or 11th century kind of what I call a war canoe. And we can see that the logboats are becoming less crude over time and more developed and more refined. This is what originally would have been, there was a seat missing, but there would have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seats on this vessel here. very nice rounded bow, very finely carved, very thin walls, only talking about a centimetre. Beautifully carved. And whilst it's a beautiful object, it probably floated really well and skimmed the water. When it's been rowed, you imagine four people rowing this vessel, and maybe a guy with a steering oar at the back or a paddle helping along, but it would have really flown across the lake. Although it's finely carved, it's failing as well, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But on this boat, we found 4 axes, 3 Hibernian Norse or Viking style axes. These are battle axes. So when you watch a program, the Vikings or any of those, these are the type of weapons they're using. One work axe, so you see when they're throwing the axes down, it's something like this that they're throwing. Then these are 2 little iron spears, which are called darts. And they're called darts because they're probably had a short little shaft, and that's maybe where the name darts comes from. But they were very narrow and pointy instead of a big thick spear like we saw in the Bronze Age, and they could pierce the chain now. And that was their speciality, you know. So, but the Vikings introduced these type of axes to Ireland, but it was actually the Irish then took them on board and became kind of special weapon of their own, because before that the Irish Gaelports were using swords largely, but you think how expensive, how much metal goes into a sword, compared to something like a wooden haft, which is made of cherry wood. These are all made of cherry wood. You only need a small bit of metal, but you can still be as effective in the battle. And Geraldus Cambrensis, this Welsh chronicler who was not terribly kind to Ireland back in the 12th century, kind of said there's no security anywhere from the broad axes of the Irish, and it's a detestable instrument of destruction. And you can see here you have a Gaelic Irish warrior, and I think is it Hugh de Lacy having his head cracked open with these axes, and many of the Anglo-Norman lords were killed with these axes. When we first found it, this is what we saw: a very narrow upper rim of the boat, a seat at the stern, and these ridges here with holes in them, like tall-pin holes. And we said, this must be 19th century, because it looked exactly like the fiberglass boats that we saw on the shore. And we could see places for seats. So we were surprised to find the axes, and then the visibility was terrible, you know. But this is what it looks like in the water here. Finely carved bow, a missing seat here, and here's the tall-pin holes here, and we found 2 fragments of oars, so, and very rectangular in profile, probably like the oars that you see on the curves nowadays. So you can see, as we all know, maritime traditions sometimes last a long time and don't move on forever. I'll skip that. But in the middle of the boat was a big red sandstone slab. You can't see how red it is there. A little fossil stone. You can see it there. It's about maybe 50, 60 centimeters wide. As part of its cargo, and there was a crack in the floor below that. So the vessel was probably suitable for carrying a group of warriors around the lake with speed to raid and pillage and control and so on. It wasn't really suitable for carrying something of that weight, and it probably was responsible for why the vessel sank. But when we saw the red sandstone, we knew that it's quite rare in that part of the country. Granite on one side and limestone on the other. There's only a couple of red sandstone outcrops, but we know on the island in the lake called Inchigill, which maybe some of you've been to, that there are a number of these red sandstone slabs, these kind of Celtic crosses on them, so that maybe would have been used as burial markers or so. So we think that this stuff here, there's probably a rough out, though maybe it was being brought as a gift, maybe from a local chieftain and his warriors, to keep the local ecclesiastical site and the priests and whoever were bishops are happy. So unfinished probably grave slab, which is incorporated into a later church here. But there's those spears as well, but again those axes. The axes, they're on display in the National Museum. If you want to go and see them, up on the upper floor, there's 3 of them there, and lots of other interesting artefacts. And you probably would have had the handles weren't as long as this, but maybe down to this length here. But something like that. But I'm just conscious of time. You know, not all the boats are very well preserved. Some of them are like small little boats like this, but this is one we found, and we decided to bring it ashore to record it because it was just quite small and close to shore. And when we put it back in, it still kind of floated. But this is a one-person canoe. Here you see these little footrests, so you probably have that rowing set up like on the last boat there. These are footrests for getting purchased. The upper bits of the boat don't survive. This dates to about 500-600 AD. So, but an interesting. We were able to turn it over to see the bottom of it because you don't really get to see the bottom of these boats. But just how beautifully carved it is, and you imagine the stick that would have moved in the water. It's almost like the body of a seal or something like that, or a dolphin, you know. But interesting. Still on the lake. Used to have these one-man punts, which have almost the exact same setup. Here we've got these footrests and the little toe pinholes for the oars and so on. This one's a little bit longer, but we have kind of a few others this size, about 14 foot, and that tradition of these one-man boats lived on from the early medieval period right up to modern times. Just the technology slightly changed. They've gone from a hollowed out tree to a clinker rowboat, you know. But so it's great to still see that tradition and style still on the lake. But this might be a little more interesting. We weren't so interested in the logboats, but there was a wreck found in the old River Corrib channel that leads down to the city here. It's hard to see there, but you can see just a kind of long keel here, and these kind of ribs or framing timbers here. That's the kind of about 10-metre long vessel, and we thought that it could be a vessel which somebody might familiar with the Cashlon Nua, which relates to the Annadown disaster of 1828, where 19 people lost their lives when a vessel going from Annadown to the fair in Galway City sank. And the tradition is that there was 31 people on board, mostly young people going to the fair for the day out, and a sheep put one of its hooves through the floor of the boat. And when they went to plug it with the coat, the whole plank gave way, and the water started to flood in. And then there was panic, and the vessel turned over. And 19 people tragically lost their lives. So we thought this was a good potential candidate for the vessel, you know. And there is a monument in Annadown to it, and there's a famous poem about it, that commemorates the tragedy. And so we got a survey done on it. Here you can see the vessel is actually one of the few vessels we found upside down. So it's got a square stern, and just can't really see the keel there, and a lot of the planking's gone away, it's eaten away, and we can see the floor timbers, or the framing timbers there, and the ribs, and underwater you can see it there. It's very badly degraded, you know, and it's only in a couple of meters of water, you know. It's probably if there was a drop in water, you'd probably see it from the shore. But when we dived it, we found this patch on it here, which was kind of like a lead patch that was stuck onto it with glue, arrowite glue. So we very quickly learned that it's probably from the 1950s onwards, and which is surprising because it kind of had the feeling of there was something of a bit more antiquity. But so it's not relating to the Annadown disaster, which is unfortunate not to find that wreck, but it is all the same interesting, and probably a vessel that was used to bring turf up and down the lake from Connemara, the western shores of Connemara, down to Galway City to be sold, and just had a bad day and capsized. I think this might be the last one. So I've kind of always been going chronologically, but this is slightly earlier. So Trevor located this kind of anomaly here. Sometimes it's not very obvious what they are, but it's worth investigating, because when you look at the surrounding seabed, it's kind of just quite plain. So, and usually these kind of features here are probably the most interesting ones, you know. The very obvious ones probably sometimes tend not to be as interesting. So when we dive, this is what we came across here. This is one of Trevor's images here, but you can see unusual construction here, but or so it looks, with some of the ribs sticking up above the lake bed and cross timber here, and we weren't sure what these timbers were here. So we weren't sure if we were dealing with a wattle vessel, like you'd have like with the old kirks, and there's a combination of ripping and wattling or so on. But after a number of days work on it, and the silk can be very easily removed from these, we found out that it was actually a clinker built vessel, like 10 metres long, and that those timbers were actually, they were kind of wattle like, but there was actually part of the cargo as part of cut hazel. So it was carrying a cargo of cut hazel here. There's a stone here on which is helping to keep it down, and this cross timber helping to keep it all in place. We got the wood analysed. You can tell that that's oak there, but some of the other timbers were lighter and they were pine. So it's a combination of probably an oak vessel with pine repairs on it, and a cargo of cut hazel wood. And we were diving, we think this looks very Viking, or very medieval. And the way the timbers were cut, the cut marks on them. This is stuff you find in medieval Dublin. You've probably found it, similar stuff in wattle panelling and so on in the medieval houses there. And the construction is just it's straight out of a Viking or medieval style vessel. You can see there's a single massive vessel here. We see the mast step. The mast doesn't survive. You can see how shiny and fresh the timber looks. Like if it was cut almost yesterday. So we went down and recorded. No coin in there, unfortunately. So this is a little bit squished. It should be a bit longer, but 10-metre long vessel. It's only about 4 metres wide here. You can see the cargo wood, central mast step. That side of the vessel doesn't survive very well. There's some sort of clay packing there. Maybe he uses sealant or something like that. Red sandstone slab here, maybe used to stand on, or else just to help keep down the timbers here. You can get a bit of the stern. No, that's the bow there. There is part of a rudder back here, and part of the stern post there. So we're very excited. That's what it looks like on sonar after we've excavated it. Not very clear, but that's just as good as it came up. So we were thinking, oh, this must be medieval, as I said. Similar maybe to, this is seal Dublin here. You've one of these double-ended clinker-built vessels. I think that's the seal of, where's that? Anyway, but one of those type of vessels, and we were very excited. Until we found, until we found this stem of a clay pipe, and now we were thinking at times that it could have fallen in, because we have found a logboat with a 50p coin in it that dates to 1570, and the coin dated to 1970. So we found this, we got it analysed, and the consensus was it was probably 1750 to 1850. So we got the cargo dated and the hull dated, and they both date to 1750 to 1850. So it's kind of a technology. It's almost like Viking medieval-y technology. Even the cut wood looks very kind of older, but it's survived in one of these rural locations on the lake, which is interesting. So it's a traditional craft, and it's very important. And I hope we get the opportunity to go back and maybe take out all the wood and record the vessel in more detail, and get the wood more analysed in more detail. And I think it's important from that point of view, because a lot of work in the lake has been focused on the logboats, which are very important too, but there are lots of other traditional boats on the lake that need further investigation, but sometimes it can be harder to get the funding to do those things. Whereas if you find a Viking axe, people get excited very easily. I know we might hear about this later, but you're probably dealing with something a vessel like the Drogheda boat, which Dom has worked on, and this is a vessel that was found in 2006 in Drogheda, Riverboyne. Again, a 10-metre long clinker-built boat. That one was two-masted, but probably similar enough construction. But we won't know until we get analysed. But the same technology, clinker, and so on. So interesting, exciting, all the same, But so there's many more boats and many more stories, but maybe to tell them another time. Lots of other interesting finds which which we can't talk about at the moment, but that's really it. We hope to go back the next 2 years and then finish off our work, and we need to develop a management plan for the site, because it's kind of swing and record them, so we need to try and manage how prevent anchoring on them. Some of them have been damaged by anchoring, others have been damaged by construction work, so we need to make sure that they're protected going forward, and that's our challenge now. Once we kind of gather all information, we can then put a plan in place to hopefully record them, or document further, publish the results of our survey work, which we have done a small bit here and there, but I can see several kind of monographs coming out on these boats, that would be of interest to specialists, but hopefully to the general public alike, and then maybe we need some more generous publications as well. And ideally I'd love to see some of them go on display, whether it be in Galway or in Dublin or somewhere else in a suitable venue, because each boat has a story to tell, and I can only give you a very quick overview of them tonight. So, but that's it. So I'll leave it there. So thanks very much. Yeah, cheers.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'll agree with me that that was an absolutely fascinating lecture. What I find absolutely amazing is that technology didn't change very much in thousands of years. It had sort of reached the pitch of perfection very early on and didn't need to be improved for the purpose for which they were used.
Exactly, yeah.
I find that absolutely incredible. I think you're to be greatly congratulated on all this very, very important work you've done, not only on this site, but on all of the other sites that you've worked on, including the recent recoveries from Strida Strand with the Armada artefacts. So I'm sure there must be some questions for Karl. Dennis?
Isn't it a bit surprising? I mean, wood floats.
Yeah.
But there's so many logboats without stones in them.
Yeah.
On the bottom. Does the wood eventually just absorb water?
Well, they do absorb water. So when you take it out of the water, they'll dry out and they'll become brittle. But when you leave them in water, they remain soaked. But I think eventually they become kind of waterlogged. But if you think like they are a vessel, so I'm not an expert in Archimedes' principle, but when you have this tub-like shape, that they will float even if they are quite heavy. But if any sort of water gets into them, they will. The water is more dense than wood, so if water gets on top of it, they just sink to the bottom. Now, that's oak boats. So if you have a pine one, they'd be lighter and they might float. And I have seen videos of logboats in the Philippines, where a logboat fills with water and 2 kids get up on it and they stand on either side and they shake it from side to side. The water jumps out and the thing rises up and floats. So but it is a question. But once some develop cracks, and then the water just gets in and they become waterlogged, and then they probably just gradually sink down. All bar one is sitting upright on the lake bed. There's only one out of 50 on its side. So, and then that one that was 1,500 years old, and there was only the base of it left, and we put it in the water, it still floated. So eventually the waves came in over it, and they kind of just started to sink down. But so they do obviously operate very well, but probably easily capsized, and once they get capsized, they'll probably sink down and sit in their natural kind of equilibrium of not turning upside down, just sink down to the bottom upright, But I do wonder how some of the artefacts stayed in them. Why didn't they just float off, or get washed out, if it goes down the bow first or something, or like even the stone in one of them is just all stones in the middle, and there are 2 slight ridges probably holding it in. There's 1 or 2 stones outside it, but it's all kept inside it, so they're
Raj?
Is there any likelihood that Lough Corrib would have been a lot smaller, a lot bigger in prehistory? I mean, it was a super lake in the middle of it, but it's now down to Lough Corrib and Lough Corrib. But they were much bigger scale.
It definitely was bigger. Like the current lake level is a metre lower kind of did some drainage works in the 1840s and 50s, and they lowered the level of the lake.
Okay.
Then, so it was definitely higher, and you can see some ancient shorelines there.
Right.
Then obviously the lake levels go up and down seasonally, but you also see in a lot of areas around the lake there's large areas of bog, and all those bogs were originally lake.
Exactly,
Yeah. So, but we just don't know when the bog rise above the lake, you know. But certainly the bog is probably slowly encroaching in on the lake over time. But Lough Corrib is an interesting thing that in the annals it's recorded several times from, let's say, 1171, another time, and then in the 1640s the lake levels drop. And it's of great interest to the natives of Galway who wade onto the riverbed and start picking up, they mention the axes and spears and artefacts of ancient times.
Okay.
You know, and there seems to be, because it's a karst landscape, you have all these subterranean tunnels, and actually Loch Nass feeds into Lough Corrib
Oh yeah.
via these tunnels. And when they try to build a canal,
Yeah, the limestone.
yeah. So that they think that in the River Corrib that there was a drainage hole that just unclogged or something, and the lake levels dropped or something like that, you know. And then maybe clogged up again. So the water levels were regulated. And I think they may have tied in with cold spells, but it's hard to see the River Corrib dry up to a trickle, you know, because it's such a strong flow of water in it. It's one of the strongest flows of water for its length or something like that. It's a very strong flow of water. Now, even though it's like 5 or 6 kilometres long, the river. So, but yeah.
Thanks.
Paddy,
On these logboats, Karl,
Yeah.
what would be the typical wall or hull thickness of, say, a 7 or a 10 metre boat?
Well, it depends. Like that one, the Viking axis, was only 1 or 2 centimetres, right? Very thin. But that was the ultimate boat, right? And ultimately it was too thin because. But the problem was, the forward boat, they were still sapwood, and the sapwood's weaker than the hardwood. So, but some of the bigger ones are 7 or 8 centimetres, you know, thick, and they probably wouldn't have floated very high in the water. They would have had low free water, but they do get more refined. I hope that's not my phone. They do get more refined as they go along, and the whole profile changes. And in the early days, in the earlier boats, they're all rounded, you know, and then in the Bronze Age they become a bit more squared, you know, but then they go a bit back more rounded again. But they do get thinner, more refined. You can always tell now, not always, but it's thin walled, and it's probably a bit later, you know. And then you get boxy in medieval times. You get a bit more boxy and splayed and so on. But it does depend on their function as well. So, you know, certain boats would be thicker if you're carrying certain things, and you know, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
somebody else had a question there. Ollie?
Dating the timber
Yeah.
in the various logboats.
Yeah.
How did you do it?
Well, most of it we dated by radiocarbon dating. So we go down and take a little sample, maybe quarter size of matchbox, and we would send it off to a lab in Queens, and they can do their analysis on it, radiocarbon dating. And
What was the oldest one?
well, the oldest one, I didn't show it because today, but the oldest one was about 3,500 BC. So middle Stone Age or middle Neolithic. You know, a few hundred years before New Grange was made, and we've 2 Stone Age ones, and they're both made of pine, and every other logboat is made of oak. They're the only pine logboats in Ireland, actually, you know, and they're both Stone Age, you know. So, and the latest, up until last summer, the latest was that 11th century one with the Viking axis, and then we got one which I was going to show an image of, but I didn't want to be here all night. But it was unusual. It looked Bronze Age, but then we found the 50p coin from 1970 in it, you know. And we thought somebody's been here before, you know. Or could have just accidentally fallen in. But probably somebody was there, you know, and left a ritual deposit in the boat. But that dated to 1570. So we're getting a span from the stone, from the Neolithic around 3000 BC right up to the 16th century. You know, and I was kind of thinking that when we look at the pollen records, we can see what trees are growing in the area over time, and oak is depleted really largely by around 1000 AD. All the oak trees have been stripped down, you know, and all the pine trees are gone, and it's changed more to scrub and bush, you know, and our boats stopped around 1100 AD, and we thought, look, there's no oak, they're not building logboats anymore, they're using skin boats, corks and stuff. But then we found this one day in the 1570s, so I said maybe not all the oak is gone, but a lot of it's gone, you know. So
I was involved in
Yeah.
Canada,
yeah.
salvaging sunken logs from log drives,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and 5% of the logs would always sink.
Right,
They
okay.
were always hardwood,
Yeah,
and every 100 logs was stamped. And some of the logs, and this is now the late 50s,
yeah, yeah.
when I was a
Yeah.
younger man than I am
Yeah.
now, we were able to date them by the stamp
Oh, no way, okay.
that
Yeah.
was on it.
Yeah,
But it was always oak, and
Yeah.
5% of the
Yeah.
oak.
right.
But when we took the logs out, some of them were on the bottom for over 100 years,
Wow.
and the timber was as good as the day it went in. In
Yeah.
fact, I made a good few shillings out of it.
Yeah, but no, yeah, it's interesting that the wood, you know, has different percentage of moisture in it, and based on how it's made up. And some is a lot of sapwood, some wouldn't have sapwood, would be more hardwood, and you know, so not all wood is the same as you've rightly pointed out there. So that's interesting to know. Yeah,
Like,
Karl, further to Wally's question,
yeah.
was there any element of dendrochronology used in dating the thing, or is carbon dating just as effective as that?
Faster and cheaper.
It's faster and cheaper, and to do dendro dating on it, where you basically take a sample, count tree rings. You have to basically cut the logboat,
It's destructive.
and then if you think about the logboat, think about the tree, and you're basically getting the outer rings.
Yeah, so you're not getting full.
You have to get the end,
Yeah,
and
right through the
they're
middle.
not. It's not always a big block. Sometimes it's at an angle, so it's hard to get a good sample. But that's the best way to do it.
But just one other question I have.
Yeah.
The vessel that you thought was the one
Yeah.
involved in the disaster, was
Yeah.
that the one mentioned in the song on a poem?
Yes, that's the very.
Yeah. With Prislanta.
Yeah, that's the very one. And,
Didn't turn out to be it.
yeah, well, look, the 200th anniversary is coming up in 4 years. Hopefully, we find it before then. Yeah,
Joe Ryan?
yeah,
Just an observation,
yeah,
something I heard yesterday about the restoration of Notre Dame,
yeah.
the availability of oak. They had to scour the whole of France to come up with 2,000 oaks
Yeah,
to get beams to put into
yeah,
the restoration.
yeah. Well, it used to be everywhere in Ireland, and now, well, I suppose by 1200 it's just been cleared. So versatile and useful for all sorts of stuff. And then when the Anglo-Normans came in, they started to strip it away. You get a huge increase in production of charcoal for smelting iron,
Yeah,
and
like barrel staves.
barrel staves, and you name them, ships for the English Navy. Started a bit later, you know.
Abandon,
Yeah.
1620s.
Yeah, yeah. So it's well gone, you know. So, but yeah, and the problem now, like when people are trying to build a logboat, they're probably trying to get a tree. It's hard to get a tree wide enough and long enough to build a replica logboat now. So that's why that replica that UCC made was only 5.5 meters long instead of 7.5. You know, so and it's expensive. So, yeah.
I have another question or two. John?
What do you do to preserve them in situ?
Well, it's quite simple, really. If you can do it, is that like those logboats have preserved really well for thousands of years. Some of them, and some of them you can see like bits of grass and reeds and stuff in them that are thousands of years old. If you cover them in a protected layer of wood, so if you can get this thick, sticky wood that little bugs and critters find hard to penetrate, that will protect them. But you have to get a certain level of burial, and the deeper the better. I think once you go about 0.5 meter, a lot of the organisms that need oxygen can't get that deep, and they're the ones that would eat away at it. So you're trying to remove the oxygen and the critters that would do it, so you bury it. But now it's with increased storminess, you bury it 1 year and you come back and it's uncovered, you know. Or else it can be the opposite. You bury it a little bit and then come back and it's totally buried the following year, but after a storm. So
do you bring sort of say super consolidated boulder clay or something on top of
no,
it?
it's all there in
Or
the
they
lake.
just dredge nearby?
Yeah, it's all there in the lake. And a lot of marl. No, we sometimes put in lake marl, which is really thick, sticky clay, and then the silt. No, we sometimes have to go back 2 or 3 times over 2 or 3 years because you put the silt in and then it kind of settles down, and just the rim of it is exposed, and then you go back and bury it again. You know, so it's a challenge for sure, but. What we don't want to do is cover something and then leave it in the worst state than we found it, where it's open to degradation and so on. So and that will definitely form part of our long-term plan, that we will monitor these sites, you know, and maybe we'll move some of them to very benign areas where we know we bury them, they're sheltered, and set them up and move off them. But that's current talk.
We have another question before we move on. Look, before we wrap things up for the night, sorry.
Yeah,
Tony,
so in this area of Lough Corrib, it's obviously a bit shallower, so there's a lot of potential to find things there. But do you think there's potential in other parts of the lake, and also are there other lakes in Ireland that you would expect that there could be high potential for these kind of finds?
Yeah, there must be more logboats there. I said if one sank every 100 years, for 8,000 years, there's 800 in that lake, you know. But that particular spot was very busy, you know. The sonar unit that Trevor was using to find them is very good in shallow water. It's not so good in deeper water, you know. So it's possible that his technology just wasn't suitable for that. You'd use a different technology, you know, maybe a more expensive sonar to get to the deeper stuff. Definitely, lots of other lakes have it. Sometimes it's just lots of logboats in small lakes. I mean, you can think, why would they want a logboat in such a small lake? But they're obviously doing something to use it. Like there was a survey done at Lough Corrib and there was virtually nothing found. And you kind of think that's maybe a more historically important lake, you know, being on Shannon at Lone Town and lots of really important sites around it. But again, maybe the environment of the lake bed's different, where they're buried in the mud and they haven't been picked up. Yeah, maybe you need to use different technology for that, but yeah, loads more out there, you know, so yeah.
Your talk has certainly aroused a great deal of interest, and it's very gratifying to know that all of us watery folk are part of an ongoing tradition that started thousands of years ago. Before we wrap it up for the night, I'm going to ask Mr. Halstead to pose a vote of thanks to Karl.
Thanks, Cormac. We're very lucky. We're very lucky, fortunate in Ireland that we have people like Karl at the Underwater Group that is established with his colleagues Connie Kelleher, Julianne, Donahue, right? And now new people, right?
New people,
which is great, right? It's wonderful. And we were just chatting before we sat down, and the pity you saw little clips at the end of the Drogheda boat from the 1600, which is fascinating. Two-masted vessel from Drogheda, and the terrible pity is that, with the exception of the television program on Lough Corrib, Lost Ship, right? Yeah. And now Karl's presentation, we haven't got to hear about the wonderful work being done by the Underwater Archaeology Group. And so he tells me that he told me before, as we were chatting, that there's funding now and hopefully good news on that to in the department, in your department. And please God, we'll see a lot more than excellent presentations like the one we've seen now from Karl. Thank you, Karl.
Make a very small presentation on your behalf. Very small token I might add.
Yeah, it must have been.
There's a envelope in there as well. Thank you very much indeed.
Cormac is too modest. We should remember that even before the Underwater Archaeology Unit was set up, that the lobbying by the Maritime Institute, and especially Cormac, and the earlier group, right?
Yeah.
And one other member of this club, Captain Crothers, let's mention him as well, the late Captain Crothers, that they got the system, the wrecks designation as national monuments. And that was a huge step forward in the whole process, and thankfully that's happened. And that was thanks to Cormac and other people from the UART, wasn't it?
Very small part I played, I might add.
Yeah.
But there's many very worthy people, including Karl, were in that group.
But let's give them credit for that as well.
I would just like to, on behalf of all of you here, I'd just like to add my voice to the vote of thanks to Karl. Thank you very much indeed, Karl.